You're listening to The Artist Athlete, Episode 5, sweetheart. I'm Shannon McKenna, and I'm the host of the Artist Athlete podcast. This podcast is dedicated to Circus. It's a resource for those working in the industry to share our stories, viewpoints, and information, and a place for outsiders to get a sneak peek into our world. Today's guest is circus therapist Carrie Heller. Carrie is the founder and executive director of the Circus Arts Institute in Atlanta, Georgia. She has spent over 40 years in the circus ring, mastering an array of skills, and is the author of the industry's first aerial circus training and safety manual. She's a co-founding member of the American Youth Circus Organization and has served as a trainer for Cirque du Monde, a Cirque du Soleil outreach program that uses social circus to help youth around the world. She's the co-author of the recently published article entitled Circus Arts Therapy, Fitness and Play Therapy Program Shows Positive Clinical Results. The letters behind her name are MSW, LCSW, RPT. Let's find out what all those letters mean in her interview, starting now. Welcome to the show, Carrie Heller.
Thank you.
I'm super excited to have you.
I really appreciate you having me here. Thank
Yay.
you.
Well, I'm actually here in your facility. It's beautiful.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate you coming here and having me on your podcast. So
it's a pleasure. How long have you been in this space?
Off and on for almost 30 years.
30 years you've been here.
Well, 1989 is when I first moved into this building. We had left and come back based on the growth of the program and how it evolved and changed.
Was it always gated like that?
It was always gated.
Yeah.
And there was only about a few people that were here when I first moved in. And I did live and work here at the same time for years until it grew.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, the city's just changed so much, and I was kind of laughing at how it's gated, but then I was like, oh, but in 1989, you probably wanted that.
Yes, it was most things that were where people lived around here was gated then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yep.
Cool. So let's start. You mentioned you started circus when you were 8.
Correct.
Doing this. What did that look like? Because I assume it's very different than what you're doing now.
Yes. Well, there was no circus schools and no circus camps when I started in the 1970s, except one camp that we knew about that was in Florida called Camp Keystone. And the reason why they had a circus rig there is because they had students from the FSU Flying High Circus there. Because the owner of the camp was a graduate of FSU, so she invited some of them to set up. She thought it would be a fun thing for a camp. So the Spanish web was hanging from a tree, and there was an outdoor rig, and there was a tight wire between two trees.
Oh, my gosh.
So that's how I grew up at that camp learning from FSU performers. But that was, and prior to that, I was a little acrobat. I had taken acrobatics and dance and ballet, so I was already loving all of that, and I thought I had maybe died and gone to heaven. When I saw a trapeze at this camp, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing.
That's awesome.
So that's what it looked like then. And I just grew up. I went back every summer and did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so, did you ever perform? Or were you ever in that world?
I was. As I was growing up, every summer we performed.
Right.
So I grew up performing.
Yeah.
And then when I moved to Atlanta, Georgia, to be a full-time therapist, I decided that I would be a circus performer just on the side because I loved it. It was a great way to stay in shape, and it was a way I could make additional income. So that's how I started teaching here. I ended up setting up a trapeze just so I could rehearse for performance purposes.
Oh, wow.
And then instead of paying rent, the owner was interested in doing a trade with me where I would teach a class in exchange for my workout time. And that's how I started teaching in Atlanta. But I taught at the summer camp when I was old enough to teach. And I had already performed every summer. And I did a little bit of an actress, and and then whenever we had dance performances, so I was used to performing a little bit, and then when I did it in the summertime at camp, it was just for fun more than anything.
Right.
Then in Atlanta, I found a producer, and I got a resume and a headshot I can't even remember what the name of that is now. We don't use them anymore. The the page with all of our pictures on it.
Oh, yeah. It's like the little cards
yes.
that you would do, and it's got like your body shots and all of that. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
So I sent those
I don't know what they're called, but
I can't remember either, but I sent them to all the agents and just did a little performance on the side. So I did perform a little bit in addition to teaching here.
That's interesting. So when you started your therapy work, it was totally separate from your circus work.
That is correct. And what happened was I noticed how self-esteem was increasing, trust was building, bonds were formed, better communication was happening. Through my new clinical glasses, I started seeing so many positive clinical pieces happening that I thought, wow, this is amazing. And then I started reading more about dance movement therapy, and I did a little work with a dance movement therapist to see perhaps if I wanted to go back and get a master's degree in dance movement and incorporate the circus into that, because I thought this is so therapeutic. So I started writing down everything I was seeing in the classes with my new clinical glasses on.
Sure.
And that's when it started merging in my mind. But it was two separate things for quite some time until I asked my supervisor at the runaway shelter I was working with if I could bring juggling scarves and then balance boards into the play therapy room. That was the beginning of the merging of it. So that was happening while I was noticing the incredible therapeutic gains in my regular classes, because I decided to open up my classes to families as well. So I had families coming in, individuals, friends, siblings.
Oh, wow. That's very cool.
That's how that happened.
So I just want to kind of go back a little bit, because I think when a lot of people think therapist, they think someone who sits on a couch with you and talks about all the horrible things that happened to your mom. What kind of therapist are you? You know, like that kind of thing. So is that what you were doing?
So when I first worked at this runaway shelter, I saw everybody. And when I did my work as a internship at school, I was at a counseling center that had people of all walks of life coming in for all different reasons. And I wanted to have a variety of cases, so I began to understand what I liked more than best. And by the time I was done, I realized I liked working with children the most, and I liked working with families. I liked helping parents learn how to help their children. So I had decided that would be my specialty, families and children. And so therefore, at the runaway shelter, though, I actually did sit in my chair while they sat on the couch and we talked, except when I was in the play therapy room with the very young children. And that was my favorite. That's when I discovered this is what I want to spend most of my time doing, is play therapy, rather than sitting on the couch talking to people, although some of what I do does involve that, but very little of that. So I'm moving most of the time, but I'll often just sit down in the middle of the circus room and start talking to somebody if an issue comes up, or I'll say, let's go sit down for 5 minutes and talk through that. Then we'll get right back up and start. I usually do therapy on the floor with people. That's how it's developed now. But there's sometimes when I'm giving feedback to a parent, we're sitting at the table and I'm giving them feedback. So there are times that I'm being a straight up therapist like you would imagine, but my early days was being a therapist like that, so I could discover what I wanted to specialize in, which was play therapy with children. And then I decided, maybe I could bring juggling scarves into the room. And what I noticed is that when the kids juggled before they spoke to me or played even, I taught crossing the midline juggling because that's what I was taught growing up. They miraculously focused a little better, and they were able to focus. I listened to me. And then when I brought the balance boards in and they started going on the balance boards while we're talking, they also were able to have a conversation, some of them a little bit easier. Years down the road, I learned about crossing the midline and brain gym and how the right and left hemispheres of the brain are working, and that's what was happening in the room, which is a lot of what we do now. Later down the road, I learned from my OT friends that when kids do heavy work and engage their muscles, it can help calm their systems when they have sensory challenges, which is a whole nother body of information.
Yeah, this is what I was going to ask, because like I mentioned in my email, my brother has Asperger's syndrome. Yep. And so he went to occupational therapy a lot because he has terrible spatial awareness, right?
Yep. So you know about the heavy work then, probably?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about it?
Yes. I think an OT would be a much better person to hear this
Sure.
from, but my understanding is that every person has a sensory profile.
Okay.
And some people are sensory seekers, and the sensory seekers sometimes will feel better when they do more exercise, and that involves perhaps a combination sometimes of cardio and strength training, but the OT will tell you exactly what the child's sensory profile is and what exercises are recommended for that profile.
Interesting.
So I have, for example, some low-engine kids who benefit from early morning exercise. I think all people benefit from early morning exercise. I like
she
to
got
say
very
that.
close to the mic when
Yes,
she said
yes.
that.
My dad was a cardiologist, so I grew up understanding how important cardiovascular exercise was. So I think everybody needs it, but there's people who wake up kind of tired and low engine. I think they can even benefit more, just like people with anxiety or depression benefit from getting up and exercising first thing in the morning because it helps us both physically and research shows mentally. So the children who need this heavy work, we discovered they're able to communicate better when their body is calmer and they have this going on, which is why a prescription for some of the children I work with includes a lot of exercise.
Yeah.
And I like occupational therapists to evaluate the children I work with and give that prescription. And then we work as a team, and I'll speak with them about what might be best. And it almost always includes climbing a rope, doing trapeze,
of course.
and balance boards. It almost always includes these things. And it
Yeah.
almost always includes some crossing the midline activity like juggling. So that's...
Can you talk a little bit more about this crossing the midline concept?
So again, I think an OT would be the best person to
Sure.
speak about that, but there's the right and left hemispheres of the brain, and this is the midline of our body comes right between our chest all the way down, and when we do activities like dance where we do a crossover step,
Yeah.
where we make like a cross, even hugging yourself.
Where you cross the midline of your body.
Yep, like a hug. If you hug, I'm crossing the midline right now.
Okay.
Okay. And then, so I have made up exercises like hugging and touching your elbows to your knees. So we're doing things that involve crossing the midline because research is showing that that helps with the right and left hemispheres of the brain, which can then help to some degree with regulation and other things. Focusing gets better.
Cool.
And they're able to think more clear. So there's a relationship to some executive functioning in the brain where if the body is doing certain exercises and if we train both cognitively and from an exercise standpoint, there's many things that we can do to help with executive functioning.
Okay.
And so there's a relationship between, crossing the midline and helping with focusing and things like focusing and problem solving and being able to hold conversations. And, some of that has to do with the executive functions in our brain which a lot of the children that come to me struggle with.
What's your ideal profile do you call them patients, clients?
So I call them clients.
Okay.
And I work with kids, the children that benefit the most from this work are children who have some developmental delays that makes it so that they might not want to exercise or they're not motivated to do so. So this is a fun thing for them to do. And then what comes along with that, sometimes developmental delays, is some social skills challenges. So therefore, the ideal client for me is a child who has social skills challenges because we have social skills groups going on, as well as some of these sensory challenges or a need to be physical. And in today's world, I think so many kids are on their phones and computers so much that they're not as motivated to go out and exercise.
Yeah.
So those kids who are not exercising in particular, they can benefit from this because it becomes then I talk a lot in the social skills training about how important exercise is. So, and we talk to the kids about how important that is because they need that for their bodies.
What I'm interested in is patient or a client could do any kind of exercise really prescribed. What do you think it is about Circus specifically that helps people?
I think it's specifically the fact that it makes them feel good about themselves when they learn these new and unusual tricks. And as a result of that, their self-esteem and self-confidence increases. I think that's the biggest benefit of circus arts, is increasing confidence. And then if you throw in encouraging statements and therapeutic language to help lock in these new experiences, I find it's life-changing for people. And that's the exact combination that I found is most beneficial, doing the circus with therapeutic language to lock in all of these amazing therapeutic benefits that are happening anyway. So even if you do a class without the language, self-esteem increases.
Right. I've seen this.
Yes. And before I even did therapy using circus arts, like the first classes I saw self-esteem increasing, I saw trust increasing, and I wasn't even doing therapy. I probably threw in some therapeutic language because I'm a therapist,
right.
But I wasn't focusing on that, whereas now I am focusing on it. And to answer your other question, not only kids with sensory challenges, and children who that includes often children who are on the autism spectrum, and they benefit from being in here too, because for the physicality as well as the mental and emotional and social pieces. And any child with behavioral challenges, social challenges, ADHD, lots of children who have attention challenges come to see me. And sometimes kids with mood disorders and or anxiety or depression come. And just if a child is having social skills challenges, they're just always maybe on their computer and they're not really relating to their friends. And so they get to come in here and do social skills while playing on the circus equipment.
Sure. And do they have do you teach in a group setting for those social skills?
Yes, for the social
therapy?
skills group, we do it in a group setting, and there's 4 different groups, different age ranges, and the parents commit, and the children come week after week. So that's the biggest form of therapy I do, the social skills groups.
Cool.
I also do individual therapy, sibling work, parenting counseling, something called filial training, where I teach parents some of the therapeutic language that I'm using so they can use it at home to help their kids. So we do a parenting class. That's part of me being a registered play therapist. And I love working with families. There's just a handful of families I'll work with, and this is really beneficial and fun for them in terms of using metaphors like being up on the triple trapeze, and I talk about when one person moves, it affects everybody. Then when we come down on the ground, I say, same kind of thing. When one person talks, it affects everybody, you know?
Yeah.
So I talk a lot in metaphors using the physical piece, and then we talk about the therapeutic, discussion around that. I use a tight wire for a lot of metaphors.
Sure.
And to help kids focus. So there's very few people I won't work with here, and oftentimes if I feel like someone might need something more important first, from not necessarily more important, like if I have a child who comes here who has autism and is not really engaging at all, and the parent hasn't done any therapy work on engagement only, I will recommend that happen in conjunction with what we're doing.
Okay.
So because I work on the engagement piece while we're doing circus, but I also feel like sometimes children need another therapist. Like some of the children need individual OT work. Some children need individual play therapy work in addition to the group.
Okay.
But the group is primarily what I do. Sometimes I see some children doing traditional play therapy just because I love it, using the little toys, and I have a separate room for that. Cool. But mostly it's I do individuals, couples.
Do you have assistants or instructors, or are you the only person who can do this because you're a licensed clinician?
I'm the licensed clinician in the room, and I have quite a few assistants and instructors who are certified teachers. I'm very blessed in that many of them have grown up with me.
Sure.
So,
and do you certify them?
Yes, we just started a national certification program, but even before that, I was teaching them all and certifying them in-house.
Right. And just to clarify, this is very different than a teacher training that a recreational studio in the U.S. would have anywhere, where they would bring in, say, for example, I did Nimble Arts' teacher training program back in 2012. And that's just for training teachers of recreational students. But you're speaking about another level of it where it would be therapeutically based.
So there's 2 different kinds of trainings.
Okay.
I do a therapeutically based training for circus artists, for example, in other parts of the country that want to do a little bit of the work I'm doing, and they are licensed therapists. So I do train them. That's called the Circus Arts Therapy Training, and that's a small program right now. We actually just started certifying people nationally, similar to the NECA program, where we do work with recreational teachers, and we just do straight up certifications for them. And a lot of those recreational teachers will then perhaps come to the therapy training, and then they'll learn an adaptive skill progression. We have regular skill progressions for the recreational training, and I've created adaptive skill progressions for the adaptive training.
Can you give an example of a regular skill progression?
Yes. So on the for the trapeze, for example, the bird's nest, the cradle.
Yeah.
So normally part of our first lesson is just going right into a cradle. Okay. But the adaptive progression, we have the quarter cradle, the half cradle, the three-quarter cradle, and then the full cradle.
Okay.
So we have broken down something that might be too difficult to get in the first step into multiple steps. And that's an example of what we do. And we teach possibly a little bit heavier spotting. Mm-hmm. We talk about the fact that with the adaptive progression, we always start on the low trapeze. It's 2 feet off the ground. Whereas a regular progression, if a child is strong, they're a gymnast, they come in, they go right on the regular trapeze immediately. Sure. Yeah. But with special needs, we almost always start on the low to the ground. Right. So that's an example.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify the difference between progressional versus adaptive progressional. This podcast is brought to you by The Artist Athlete. Did you know that The Artist Athlete is more than just a podcast? It's a growing online resource for students of the aerial arts to deepen their journey to badassery by accessing techniques approved by physical therapists and master coaches in the industry. Our current spotlight is on the fundamentals of aerial alignment, a practical manual for hanging upside down. This online manual is a step-by-step guide. It is complete with photos, videos, and exercises that you can implement immediately to help you gain the strength and awareness you need for an aerial practice that promotes shoulder health and longevity and good posture upright, so you don't walk around like a gorilla. But don't just take my word for it. Here's Circus physical therapist Dr. Jen Crane of Cirque Physio to tell you more.
The fundamentals of aerial alignment is an absolute must-have for every aerialist of every level. I can't even tell you how many shoulder injuries I treat that are a direct result of rushing past the basics in an attempt to get a trick too soon. In the manual, Shannon deconstructs the fundamentals, including the correct muscular engagement to safely arrive in these positions and the rationale for why it matters. Of course, in addition to all of these fabulous pearls of wisdom, the book is also ridiculously fun to read. It's been lovingly garnished with the Shannon humor we all know and love.
Thanks, Jen. Cirque Physio is also featured in the book to give scientific insight into why it all works. Pick up your copy today by going to theartistathlete.com and clicking e-manuals. Listeners of the podcast can get a 10% discount by typing in the offer code PODCAST at checkout. Again, that's theartistathlete.com, offer code PODCAST. Now, back to the show. How much of your training is also in the language? Because you talk about therapeutic language. Yeah. There's another component going on here with you.
There is. There's a huge other component where I'm speaking a little bit of a certain kind of language. For example, almost everything that I do and say is either going to be a reflection, an empathic statement, an encouraging statement, or when necessary, limit setting. Sometimes we do problem solving as well. But there's a whole language I've learned as a play therapist, and I use that language, and most of it is called, from the theoretical background of child-centered play therapy, where we do a lot of reflection. I also have an Adlerian theoretical background where I'm looking at, is this child connecting with other kids? How's their courage and how's their communication? There's certain things I'm looking at. I'm looking at the family system, how they interact, and I'm gathering a lot of information from parents, I mean. So there's multiple things that I'm going to look at, but the language is what I learned in school, and I stick to that language,
Gotcha.
when I'm doing therapy. Whereas if I'm teaching a fitness class, you'll hear me going in and out of that language,
Yeah.
Like for therapy, it's really important to encourage, and there's a difference between encouragement and praise, and that's the kind of thing.
Oh, interesting. What is
Yeah.
the difference between encouragement and praise?
So praise is where I'm going to evaluate the outcome. Good job,
Yeah, okay.
Shannon, right? That's me evaluating your process. Whereas an encouraging statement, so if you do a cradle on the ropes, I might say, way to go, good job, Shannon. And in my opinion, that's necessary in the circus. You just got a new trick, and it's good when you've gotten an A. It's, I'm congratulating you. Whereas if I was doing an encouraging statement, it would sound like, I could tell you worked really hard to learn that cradle. It's me commenting on your process.
The process versus the outcome.
Yeah, and research
Okay.
shows that's what helps build more true self-esteem. Okay?
Interesting.
So I think we sometimes will overpraise when we could be encouraging. So I teach in my therapy training, I talk about that, and I touch on it in the aerial training for regular recreational people. Just because I'm a therapist, I want them to hear a touch of that.
Right.
And then the other reason for praise is if you want to see a behavior change. If I have a child that no longer hits, you're going to see me go, way to go, way to keep your hands to yourself.
Right. You have
That's
that
the way-
positive reinforcement. Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I'm locking that in. That's a reason for praising someone when you want to see a behavior change in a child.
Gotcha.
You know,
That's
those
fascinating.
are the two times I usually will use praise. Otherwise, I try and do encouraging statements, and I try and teach parents about that too. It also, there's a whole concept of returning responsibility to the child that the play therapist is working for, and that helps with that as well.
Yeah, I think as a coach also, just talking about normal students that I have, quote unquote.
Yeah, typically developing students totally benefit,
They benefit
from
from
encouraging
that as well.
statements.
Yeah, exactly.
So like I
Sure.
say, I go in and out of that when I'm teaching a fitness class, but I'm much more in than out now because I'm so used to speaking that way to everybody.
So I just had this, and as I'm saying this out loud, I'm also thinking about it, so I'm not sure if it's going to be the most articulate. But when you're outcome based, like if you're training in a professional setting or you want to go to Cirque du Soleil or these big festivals or these big schools, oftentimes I might cut this out. There are coaches that will, there are mind games that are played, but they're kind of adverse. Or they can be negative on the students, but the results are tangibly, or the outcome is the same.
For example,
I remember I've heard stories of this girl who is now an amazing cloud swing artist, and she had a coach once who told her she looked like a piece of floating in a toilet bowl. Mm-hmm. Right? And she would go home and she would cry, and then she would come back the next day. And
so what's my opinion about that?
yeah, I'm interested to hear the tough love kind of approach to circus or coaching.
Yeah, I completely disagree with it. That's my opinion.
Okay.
Okay, there's no reason, I think, ever to say that to another human being. I think there's other ways to help someone gain in self-esteem and be successful. And I've seen it happen in other ways.
Sure.
So it's just my opinion, and I'm
of
not
course.
putting down individual coaches
No, of
because
course
they
not.
do amazing jobs.
Right.
But it's just not what I would recommend.
Yeah, sure.
It's just
No,
not.
I was just interested if you had any, if there was any kind of tangible or practical, numbers about whether positive reinforcement, because that's been shown before to be more constructive than negative reinforcement.
So what I can tell you, I can refer you to a book by Howard Glasser that he wrote about, quote, the difficult child, and he has a whole theory about how if we can positively reinforce and focus on the positive rather than the negative, that he feels, and I'm not sure if he did research on it, but if he did, it would be in that book. But he goes on to explain why it's much better to focus on the positive than the negative. And so clinically, research-wise, I don't know if I'm guessing there's been research done, but I don't know about it. But I was just taught in school that was the better way to approach things, and it makes more logical sense to me, because then
it also makes you feel better. Put someone down as a coaching
it makes
approach.
It makes you feel better, and also I don't know if I would want my student to go home and feel bad about themselves to get to the result I want them to get to.
Sure.
If I have a way for them to go home and just, analyze things, think very critically about the work they're doing, and come to a place of the same advanced skill level through a positive process, that's just what I would choose, and that's just what I was taught by my teachers. Right. Research or no research, it just makes more sense to me. The coaches who were brought up that way, sometimes their coaches talk to them that way, which is why I think they talk to their students that way. That's my guess.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if I could have a heart-to-heart conversation with those coaches, I'd say, hey, let's just try it this way. Yeah.
I would invite you to try it this way.
I would invite you to try this positive approach, but I'm not putting down you, but it's just, that's my honest opinion.
Sure.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the research that you do have, because you just told me as we walked in the door from this that you have and I don't know the right words, you published a paper?
Yeah, we published a data-driven research paper basically showing positive clinical results to the circus arts therapy work I'm doing. And it's just been published in the International Journal of Play Therapy in the April 2018 issue.
Volume 27. Number 2.
Yep. And if you email me at circusartsinstitute.com, I can lead you to read the article. It's where there's
and I'll put a link to all of your access in the show notes so you can see it there.
Thank you. And I want to also acknowledge that Lauren Tagliatella from Kennesaw State University is my research partner, and she also wrote this paper with me, so I want to acknowledge and thank her as well.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you, Lauren. So, in summary, we've proven statistically that circus arts can help with teamwork, help with following directions, and help improve physicality. And then, although it wasn't statistically significant, we were moving toward proving that there was a reduction in number of meltdowns, and there was an increase in sociability.
How did you prove this?
So,
what was your control group for this?
So Lauren had a control group at the university that never took circus, and they took questionnaires, and then all of my parents did questionnaires once every 8 weeks for years.
What are some examples of the questions that would be on that?
Do you feel like your child is having more conversations with their peers?
Okay.
Before, and there was a pre-test that gave us a baseline. Okay, and so and as we acknowledge in the paper, it would be ideal if we could have also physically tested their physicality and written down measurements, and if we had other ways to collect our data. So we're making suggestions in the paper of other more additional ways to make this even more valid.
Yeah.
But because I was working in a private practice, I really only that was what was manageable for me to do. So we're encouraging people to take our research as a starting point to do more, perhaps even in a research setting where they would have access to more tools and be able to, gather more information in different ways.
That would be fascinating.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
So we're very excited. And so the first 20 years I was, really learning about it and trying it out. And it was these last 10 years that I had an official practice that I call Circus Arts Therapy, where we've been doing this research to basically show that it is a viable therapy tool.
That's amazing.
So, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you. I'm beyond excited about it. Thank you.
We're almost out of time, but I have 2 more questions for you. The first is, and we kind of touched on it a little bit, but if someone wanted to be the next Carrie Heller, they wanted to have the next circus-centered therapy approach, what is the path that they would take? Say you're 18 years old, you may have done some social circus, you may have done, she's got her notes out. Oh my God, there's a diagram.
So I have notes for this one.
Yeah, cool.
I would recommend that you first learn skill training in the circus arts that you want to use, whether it's ground or aerial. And if you could begin doing that even younger, just get the skill training under your belt. And then if you can pick what degree you want to get, and I recommend at least a master's degree. And I have the MSW, and that I found was very, very helpful and usable and workable. And I like the idea that trained me to work with the community for social social justice, social circus work, and also it trained me to be an individual therapist. So I got the both. So that's why I recommend an MSW. But you can get a PhD or an LPC or another form of a master's degree. But then if you really want to follow my track, I recommend you also then become a registered play therapist and learn this amazing language that I'm talking about in my research paper.
Sure.
But you could also become an occupational therapist and come take my training like some do and learn the language and still use this as an occupational therapist. So then I would recommend that after you get your degrees or even before or while you're getting your degrees, you consider coming to take my therapy training. Or if there is another mentor in your community, an occupational therapist that you think you can go and work with, go and learn with them. But pick somebody that is your mentor, whose track you want to follow, and go and study with them, take their trainings, whether it be me or someone else, and then do practicums, do residencies with them. Like my level 3 is a residency, being here working with me before I say, yeah, I think we're both think that you're ready now to start your own private practice. So and then I also recommend that you get, no matter what, a good education to help prepare you for it, and always continue your education, always be under a mentor that you feel like you can learn from. And that's the short answer.
Okay. That's great. Yeah. Continue your education. Mm-hmm. Get a good one. And find someone who knows more than you to tell you what you don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ideally.
Good advice. It's good life advice for anything you want to be good at, right?
Right. And do a lot of practice. You need practice. It takes years to.
Sure.
I mean, I've been at this for 30 years now. And so it takes time to integrate this kind of thing. Yeah. But there's a clearer path now.
Right. Thank you for creating it.
My pleasure. I'm thanking all the other people too. So I appreciate it, Shannon.
So my last question is something I usually, it's the reason I started this podcast. What advice would you give yourself at the beginning of your career, I guess we could say as a circus therapist?
The advice I would give myself would be to do just what I did, but also look at the long term earlier and consider, for example, saving money early on to purchase a piece of property to build all that I was beginning to create in my mind at the time. I might have allowed myself to go into the business mind more just to prepare myself for what I was formulating in my mind.
I love that answer.
So that's but otherwise
save your money. Yeah, I love that answer.
Save money to have the physical space that you might want to have to create, if you want a physical space to create what you're doing. Yeah. But I'm renting and I'm happy with that, and that's a good solution too. But it's also great if you can have your own space. Yeah. And
money is a means to an end in any capacity. So whatever you want to do, if you can save the money for it, you can do it.
When I was younger, I didn't think of that as much. I was not as conscious of that, because all the other pieces grew organically. I didn't plan to do circus arts therapy. I planned to work with children and families, and I just brought scarves and balance boards into the room, and one thing led to another. So, and every piece of it grew organically. So, I don't even know if I had saved the money, if I would have done all the steps in the right way. But now that looking back, that would be the advice. If there was an opportunity,
such good advice.
That would be it. And otherwise, I think you have to follow your heart and also get a good education and have a good mentor and continue your education with learning updates of research and programs. And fortunately, the circus is such a fun thing, and it speaks to so many of our hearts that if you can continue to keep the fun in it for yourself, that's one of the things that's important too.
Yeah, that's so true, because it can be really not fun sometimes.
Well, business is hard, and I think there's days and moments and there's things that we all have to do that are not fun. But I've had to remind myself to make sure that I get to do something that I love to do. So get out from behind the computer more often to enjoy it.
Do the thing. Yeah, totally. Well, thank you, Carrie. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're welcome. Thank you again for having me.
Whoa. How about that for an interview? That was incredible. I'm so thankful Carrie made the time for me. Our interview made me reflect on how I work as a coach. When I was just starting out, I taught classes mostly to pay the bills between contracts and gigs. I mean, I was just as qualified as any beginner coach. I had had 4 years of training under my belt. 3 of those years were in a facility in Vermont called the New England Center for Circus Arts, which was very structured and focused a lot on beginner technique. And I had done their teacher training program using Carrie's book, so I knew how to teach and keep people safe. But because I really wanted to be at a high technical level, I pushed myself really hard. And I didn't understand the group of people who would want to do circus because it's fun or as a hobby. Much less did I know how to talk to them in a way that would be constructive for their learning. Over the years, though, as I've kind of reprioritized my life, talk about therapy, I've really woken up to the impact that circus has, even for people who don't see it as a way of life. I've seen a child gain closer connection to a foster parent through duo trapeze work, amazing weight loss stories, and several women who have left unhealthy long-term romantic relationships after starting aerial classes. Of course, all of my experiences are anecdotal, so it was really, really exciting to hear that Carrie is in the process of scientifically proving the impact of circus on self-esteem. In Circus as Therapy, Carrie is making sure that she's always speaking with empathic, encouraging, limit-setting, and sometimes problem-solving phrases. Rather than praising the outcome, she celebrates the process. I do observe in myself and others the tendency to overpraise with statements like, wow, you're really good at that. Or we talk about other artists saying things like, they are so good. What we're praising is their ability to do a trick or movement quality or their physique or some other outcome that in art form, not to be a downer, but those things are kind of fleeting. At any moment, that person could get sick or injured or choose to get pregnant or make some other life choice that veers them away from circus. And just because they can't do that one trick or move that way anymore doesn't make them any less tenacious. We're so quick sometimes to value the result rather than encourage the hard work or critical thinking or creativity, which is silly because those artists who are intelligent and passionate and determined will outshine those who are just technically good on stage any day of the week. Except Mondays. No one does circus on Mondays. And so to you all who do not feel like you are the best at your craft, like if you could just get that one skill, you would be better. I want to let you know your tenacity and your heart are what make you great. And the skill, that's just a byproduct. There's your free therapy for the week. You're welcome. I also just had to say that the personal finance nerd that lives inside my heart leapt for joy when Carrie said her piece of advice would be to save her money. No matter what your financial status is, putting money aside for future dreams will give you a big leg up. My ability to manage my finances is what allowed me to do things like seek additional training, travel the world, and start a podcast without going into massive amounts of debt on my very small income. And even though my friends make fun of me, I still spend very frugally so I can put money aside for things I really, really want to do, which is why I've been wearing the same training clothes on Instagram for the past 4 years. Speaking of Instagram, you can find me on Insta at _artist_athlete and online at www.theartistathlete.com. If you liked this episode, please tell all your friends about it, subscribe, rate, and review on whatever platform you're listening on. I've been so thrilled by the responses I've been getting so far. If you've got something to say or questions or you want to ask or guests you want to have on the podcast, just let me know. Next week on the show, I sit down with hand balancer Anton Belyakov. Anton grew up in the circus, won a silver in Cirque du Soleil, and performed for 10 years all over the world, including a year with Cirque du Soleil. This was all before his 16th birthday. Tune in next week to hear his story. Until next time, stay classy, San Diego.